the things that's nice about Unity Fellowship is the fact that no matter whether you're white, black, brown, purple, green, gay, straight, bi, trans, you're welcome here. You know, it's just the mindset of everybody here, and Pastor Bob all the way down. You know, everybody here. It's home, and you feel like you're going home. You feel like you're in a big accepting family when you're here.
So what makes Unity Fellowship different from other churches in Owensboro is their focus on making sure that everyone feels welcomed and accepted with no conditions. They're accepting of the LGBTQ plus community, of different people from different backgrounds and cultures, and this is what really led me to joining Unity Fellowship. And I also feel like many churches focus on the individual, but we are actually meant to be in relationship with others. The concept of Ubuntu, that if one person is oppressed, that all people are oppressed. And I feel like Pastor Bob, in his sermons, he really focuses on systemic injustices and oppression, and that God is on the side of the oppressed.
Well, after many years of being out of the church, we came to a point where we were ready to find a church, but I in particular knew that I no longer wanted a part of what I had experienced as a younger person. My soul and spirit had just no longer aligned with what I was being taught about myself. So I left the church for many years, and then as a couple years later, we decided we wanted to return to a church. So I knew part of that had to be a church that was totally accepting and that not just welcome to come to the door, but could fully participate in all regard, should we desire. And so we began to visit churches, and we visited Unity Fellowship a while back, and felt like we had made a discovery in a church home.
And we also like this church because it's a teaching church. Every Sunday we have the opportunity after the service, or even sometimes during it, if we have questions and we're not sure of what he's talking about, or if we have questions as to the sermon that he's preaching, that we're allowed to do that. And that's something that I've never had in a church. And it's been very enlightening, and I've learned a lot about myself, and I've learned about a lot of things, actually. And above and beyond anything else, I know that I'm loved. I know that Scott's loved, and I know that we're loved together.
And so it's not just like going to mass at a big church and you just go in, hear the thing, get up and leave. Here you actually are charged with asking yourself, what does it mean? And the membership is small enough we can all interact during the sermon as well as after the sermon. So we can ask each other questions. You learn from other people with their comments or their questions about whatever we're discussing that week or what was discussed the week before or whatever. And unlike a large church where you just know the people from sight, you actually know the people here. Whether they are active in doing something or they're just here every week and they participate in how are you doing and stuff like that. Or they tell you how somebody else that they've talked to that you haven't seen is doing. So it's like a very large, it's not just a church family, it's a large family.
Just because you came from a Baptist background or a Pentecostal background or a Catholic background doesn't mean you're not welcome. Unity will surprises a lot of people because everyone is accepted. You will feel comfortable. You won't feel out of place. You won't feel judged. You'll feel like you belong.
folks. This is Pastor Bob coming to you from Unity Fellowship. You may be really sick of church. You may have given up on church a long time ago, and maybe you're not even looking for a place. But I want to invite you to a faith community where you'll be safe, where you can be accepted for who you are. Always, for whoever you are right now on your faith journey. Check us out on Facebook Live. Check us out on Zoom. I think you'll find a place that you're safe, a place that you'll be accepted, a place that you'll feel comfortable.
What makes Unity Fellowship different from other churches in Owensboro is their focus on making sure that everyone feels welcomed and accepted with no conditions. They're accepting of the LGBTQ plus community, of different people from different backgrounds and cultures, and this is what really led me to joining Unity Fellowship. This community, at its heart, is open to everyone, and even if you are on the fence and you might disagree, we are still open to having that dialogue and that discussion that fosters growth and understanding. So I feel like the people who come to Unity Fellowship are so open and loving that even if you didn't agree with something that the church promotes, that you're still able to express that and not be judged.
Oh, you're fine. And as the bells call us to worship, let me say welcome to you. Glad for those of you who have joined us in person, as well as those who may be joining us virtually. We are so glad that you have found us wherever in the world you may be. Welcome. This is a safe place for you. All that who you are and all that makes you who you are is completely welcome here. I want to introduce our associate pastor, Pastor G, or Gator. Say a word to us, G.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Just want to reiterate what you said. Everybody's welcome. We're so appreciative you joined us today. Invite others. Let us know where you're plugging in from if you're joining us virtually, Facebook or Zoom. And also, if you can, share your camera. Engage with us throughout the service. That's the way we kind of overcome what COVID has put on us in terms of having to be virtual in some instances. So try to connect with us, trust us. There's no judgment or condemnation, and glad you're here.
Thank you, G. Today is the fourth Sunday of Eastertide, and want to begin with a droplet from a cloud of witnesses. The writer of Hebrew talks about that cloud of witnesses that surround us, ancestors, influencers, and fellow disciples who help us to run the race that is set before us. And each Sunday this year, we've been highlighting one such saint, acknowledging our indebtedness to those guides whose witness has brought illumination, vitality, and or challenge to our collective spiritual journey. Today, Cesar Chavez.
Thank you, Bob. Cesar or Cesar Chavez was an American labor rights worker. Along with Dolores Huerta, Cesar founded the National Farm Workers Association. Merging with another committee, it eventually became the United Farm Workers, UFW, labor union. Cesar's worldview was leftist politics combined with Catholic social teachings. He was born in Yuma, Arizona, to a Mexican-American family. He worked in manual labor during his early life before joining the Navy for 2 years. Afterwards, he married and relocated to California, which catapulted him into the labor rights movement. Strongly influenced by the Indian independence leader Mahatma Gandhi, Chavez implemented direct but nonviolent actions to create awareness for the plight of labor workers throughout the United States. He received great support from labor and leftist groups, but ended up being monitored closely by the FBI. In the 1970s, he expanded his influence beyond just California. He imbued his nationwide campaigns with Roman Catholic symbolism, including public processions, masses, and fasts. Although his work was extraordinary, Chavez increasingly became isolated and was alienated from many of his earlier friends and partners due to his more radical stances on issues such as immigration and etc. A controversial figure, UFW critics raised concerns about Chavez's autocratic control of the union, the purges of those he deemed disloyal, and the personality cult built around him. Farm owners considered him a communist subversive. Nevertheless, he became an icon for organized labor and leftist groups in the U.S. and posthumously became the folk saint among Mexican Americans. In 1994, he was posthumously given the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Often, the lives of our greatest heroes contain contradictions and questionable behavior, but that doesn't erode the impact they made on the ones they represented and fought for. Cesar Chavez certainly gave his all for labor workers and will be remembered as a hero among them. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor G. And I'm kind of hoping that at least occasionally one of these people that we're talking about will interest you. Maybe you'll look them up and study a little bit of the influence that they might have on you. I want to begin this morning with a video from the Asadors. This is called Broken Vessel. If you are on Facebook Live, you'll need to click on the link in the chat section. The rest of us, we can watch it together. This is the time when we share any joys, news, or concerns that we might have. If you're on Facebook Live or on our webpage, put something in the chat section and we'll read it for others. If you're present, wave a hand so that we can get a microphone so that everyone in every platform can hear you. Or if you're on Zoom, you may unmute yourself and speak, and we'll hear you here. Any news, joys, or concerns, anyone? It's not news to you, but today is Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to everyone.
Well, I do have a joy. Our granddaughter Danielle is going to have our 8th granddaughter.
Wow.
I'm sure it's a girl. There's already 7. So that'll be in September. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I would ask you to remember Debbie's best friend, Robin, as her mother is in the hospital. Well, no, she's not in the hospital, but she is actively dying, and all on Mother's Day. So keep her in your prayers, if you would, please. Robin is her name. He was in the hospital. Get the microphone. We're not hearing you good.
Let's try. Okay.
That's it.
Okay. I want to lift up my dad. He was taken by ambulance a couple of nights ago to the hospital with excessive amounts of fluid. They gave him 80 milligrams of Lasix, and normally 20 is what they give, but they did it 3 times within 24 hours.
Wow.
And then they told him night before last that he was going to go home yesterday. He refused to take the Lasix Friday night, refused again yesterday morning, so they refused to let him go home. And so he started coughing yesterday, and it was a wet cough, so he was already filling with fluid again.
Okay.
So just pray for my daughter who is down there helping with it, and her keep her temper with him because he's being stubborn at the moment. And just pray that he will listen to the doctors and do what needs to be done.
Yeah, those can be real tense times. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've visited with Gail's brother, Jerry. You remember him. He used to come here, and his wife, Virginia. And Jerry's getting dementia, and he's not functioning well. His wife, about a month ago, had a stroke, and they was looking around trying to find out why she had the stroke, and found out she had a tumor in her head. And they operated on her, found somebody that would operate on it. They operated on it, took it out, and she's been taking chemo treatments. But here's where both of them are. They don't think they're getting any better. Their medicines are not doing any good. She's going to quit her. She's taking a chemotherapy pills, and she says you can't touch them with your hand. You have to put them on with a glove. And she says we got to thinking, if you can't touch them, put them on with a glove. What are they doing when you take them in your body? So both of them are trying to saying they're not going to do the medicines anymore.
Yeah, kind of losing hope.
Yeah, they said they're 82 years old, and they've lived a good life, and they're just not going to put up with it, So
Sure.
I guess you get to that point in your life when you do, So I pray for both of them and their decisions that they have to make. I tell them it's decisions they have to make. Nobody else can make it
and
for
the
you.
rest of their family
it's
as they.
you, your life, and you have to make it, So.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else?
Bob, I'd like to pray for those struggling with their mental health. Often goes unspoken about
Right.
because of the stigma, but a lot of people are struggling with their mental health or the mental health of their loved ones. So I want to remember them in our prayers, please.
Yes, absolutely. And there are others that are unspoken as well. I know of some folks in our church family that are struggling with some issues, and so I want to pray for them as well.
Bob, we also want to celebrate all the mothers today,
Absolutely.
here and online and everywhere else.
And I think there are a lot of folks that get left out on Mother's Day, unfortunately. And Mother's Day is not always a day of good remembrance for everyone as well. So let's pray for all those who struggle because of Mother's Day, or those who can celebrate on this day. We don't want to take anything away from you that you're able to celebrate, but understand that not everyone can do that today. Let's pray together, would you, Pastor G?
Yes, would you bow with me? Oh, Creator, today we remember the mothers we've had, many of them good, but all of them broken in some way, who did their best to raise us regardless of the circumstances. We give you thanks today for the mothers-to-be that are hoping and are excited and waiting their pregnancy. We ask, Creator, that you be with those women who, for whatever reason, were never able to be moms. And they have pined for that reason for many years. Be with them, especially on this day. And remind them that their presence as a mother is not bound genetically to a child, but that they can be a motherly presence to others. Be with the prayer concerns raised today. Give people hope in the midst of feeling hopeless. Walk with us as we continue to maneuver in this time of COVID. And lastly, open our hearts and minds, open our inhibitions, remove those, Lord, so that we hear the message today and we hear the love that Bob will share, and that it sets us free in ways we never knew we were even needing to be set free. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Our affirmation of oneness. We speak these words every Sunday as a reminder of who we are and what we stand for. I invite you to repeat these words with me. Our affirmation of oneness, please. We gather in oneness together. We praise and worship God together. We proclaim God together. We welcome and affirm all persons in God's love together. And we seek to live for God in every breath and heartbeat together. If you are not already a part of our contact list, I would invite you and encourage you to text the word ADD, A-D-D, to 270-201-5022. It will send you a form where you can give us your name and any other information that you'd like to give us. I promise we won't overuse it, but every Sunday morning about 8:40, you'll receive a text with the topic for the day, as well as a link to our Zoom. And occasionally on special occasions you might get another message from us as well. But please, if you have not, please do add yourself to our contact list. And speaking of encouraging, we would encourage you to be a giver. If you are a regular attender, or you are a regular subscriber, or you are a regular viewer on Facebook or Zoom or on our webpage, please help support the work of this church. We are a small and not a wealthy church. We do a lot with what little resources we have, and so if you would like to support our work, if you appreciate what we do, what we stand for, I would encourage you to be a giver. Make it a recurring gift if you would. And you can do that by clicking on the Donate Now button, which you'll find on our Facebook page and on our web page. You may also send your gift by mail, P.O. Box 1401 in Owensboro. That's 42302. And if you're present and would rather, you can leave a check or money in the offering plate as you leave by either of the two doors. Always appreciated, never expected. We don't want you to make yourself tight in resources, but if you are able to help, we would greatly appreciate your assistance with that. Have another video for us. This is Matthew West, and the title of this one is Broken Things. The movie Hidden Figures was released back in December of 2016. It tells the story of three remarkable African American women, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan, who worked for NASA and served as the brains behind the launch of John Glenn into space back in the 1960s. Of course, men got all the credit for that remarkable feat. And without the movie, we'd never have heard about the brilliant mathematicians, engineers, and scientists, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan. At the beginning of the series, I also told the story of Muhammad Abdib, the Bedouin shepherd who in 1946 was chasing after a goat that had wandered from the flock, and he threw a rock into the cave where he thought the goat had wandered in order to maybe chase it out of the cave. He heard a strange clink and entered into the cave to explore further, discovering a bunch of clay jars, which inside of those jars turned out to be one of the 20th century's greatest discoveries, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Throughout history, people have been hidden from others' views. Some people's stories get overshadowed by others. Some get brushed aside, like the women of NASA. Others get buried and hidden from view altogether. And unless someone comes along to unearth those gems, no one knows the stories. And the Bible's no exception. There are hundreds of stories of remarkable people hidden in the pages of the Scripture as well. Sometimes simply overlooked, just minor characters to a larger story. Other times intentionally obscured so that the patriarchal heroes can be heralded. Our focal passage for the whole series has come from the Corinthian correspondence, where Paul writes, "Take a good look, friends, at who you are when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the biggest and brightest and best among you, not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose the nobodies in order to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies?" And then later in 2 Corinthians, "But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us." In this series, we've been unearthing and will continue to unearth some of the hidden treasures of the Bible, the overlooked, the unknown, the unseen and unsung heroes of the Bible. Today, we meet a young man named Mephibosheth. How many of you know who Mephibosheth is? Mephibosheth was a minor character in the story of King David. Of course, David is one of the most famous names in the Bible, right up there with Abraham and Moses for Old Testament heroes. David was a great warrior and a great king. He ruled over the united nation of Israel during its most prominent era. And oh, the stories that are told of King David, the shepherd boy who became king, anointed to succeed Saul, Israel's first king, while he was still watching sheep. Triumph over a giant named Goliath. David eventually becomes king and has a famous fall from grace with Bathsheba. We know the stories. On and on they go of King David. Today's story picks up a few years after David's rise to power and involves a little-known relative of Saul, Mephibosheth. Who is Mephibosheth? He's actually mentioned several times in 2 Samuel, but the main part of his story is found in chapter 9. Pastor G has our reading.
One day, David asked, "Is anyone left in Saul's family? If so, I'd like to show him some kindness in honor of Jonathan." It happened that a servant from Saul's household named Ziba was there. They called him into David's presence. The king asked him, "Are you Ziba?" "Yes, sir," he replied. The king asked, "Is anyone left from the family of Saul to whom I can show some godly kindness?" Ziba told the king, "Yes, there's Jonathan's son, lame in both feet." "Where is he?" He's living at the home of Machir, son of Amiel, at Lodebar. King David didn't lose a minute. He sent and got him from the home of Machir, son of Amelia, at Lodebar. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, who was the son of Saul, came before David, he bowed deeply, abasing himself, honoring David. David spoke to Mephibosheth. "Yes, sir." "Don't be frightened," said David. "I'd like to do something special for you in memory of your father, Jonathan. To begin with, I'm returning to you all the properties of your grandfather Saul. Furthermore, from now on, you'll take all your meals at my table." Shuffling and stammering, not looking him in the eye, Mephibosheth said, "Who am I that you pay attention to a stray dog like me?" David then called Ziba, Saul's right-hand man, and told him everything that belonged to Saul and his family. "I've handed over to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants will work his land, bring in the produce, provisions for your master's grandson. Mephibosheth himself, your master's grandson, from now on will take all his meals at my table." Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. "All that my master the king has ordered his servants," answered Ziba, "your servant will surely do." And Mephibosheth ate at David's table, just like one of the royal family. Mephibosheth also had a son named Micah. All who were part of Ziba's household were now the servants of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, taking all his meals at the king's table. He was lame in both feet.
Twice we're told that Mephibosheth, that is a hard word to say. I may stumble over it a couple of times. We are told twice that Mephibosheth was lame in both feet in this short story. But in order to really get the sense of this story, we need a little backstory to go along with it. I'm going to start with the backstory of Saul, who was the first king of Israel and was famously paranoid and easily threatened. We all know the story of David already, how Samuel went to find the successor for Saul before Saul was out of the picture. He found and anointed David to be Saul's successor, after which he had a famous battle with Goliath, the giant Philistine, and beheaded him. After that battle, Saul invites David to enter into the king's court, ostensibly to be the harpist for the court. More likely, because of his paranoia, it was to keep an eye on this new upcomer who was going to succeed him as king. When he entered into the king's court, Saul's court, he became fast friends with Saul's son Jonathan. Now, Jonathan is the one who would be most likely the successor, if not for David. But David and Jonathan become best friends. There is a strong bond between the two of them. And if I'm to be totally honest about what the scriptures say, there is more than enough evidence, at least insinuation in the scriptures, to suggest that Jonathan and David may have been more than just buddies, that they may have been lovers. In fact, David says at one point in the scriptures that his love for Jonathan was more than for any other, more powerful than for any woman. But that's another story altogether, and may have some impact on what is going to happen in this story, but it's not the point of the story. As David's fame continues to rise as a warrior, he's in Saul's court, but David goes out on campaigns and is very successful as a warrior and becomes famous as a result of that. And Paul's paranoia increases with every victory of David, leading him to suspect that David may be out to take him out of the picture early. Saul then decides to eliminate the perceived threat and decides to have David killed. Jonathan learns of his father's plans and warns David. He helps him escape his father. Jonathan and David make a pact, a covenant of loyalty to each other. Now for the backstory of Mephibosheth. We're going to fast forward just a little bit. I needed to give that part of the story in order to get to the story about Mephibosheth. Jonathan has a son by the name of Mephibosheth. Before David comes into power, both Saul and Jonathan and Saul's other two sons are killed in a battle, leaving the door wide open for David to become king. All of Saul's sons are dead. Upon hearing the news of Saul's death and Jonathan's death, in fact, the entire family, Mephibosheth's nurse, who is caring for him at the palace, decides to flee. It was a perceived threat on her part that those who took out Saul and his sons might come after Mephibosheth as well. In the process of running away, of fleeing with this young child in her arms, she trips and falls and permanently damages the legs and feet of Mephibosheth. Both legs crushed so that he cannot walk, permanently disabled. Apparently, all of this is unknown to David. With the death of Saul, David is coronated and becomes king. Sometime later, David then begins to inquire about Saul's heirs. He calls in Ziba or Zabah to inquire. Ziba was a servant and perhaps the steward of King Saul. One who David figured had all the inside track, would know if there were anybody left in Saul's family. So he calls Ziba in to inquire. Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I might show some favor? And we're supposed to read in between the lines here, wink, wink, right? Imagine what Ziba is thinking. They've somehow managed to keep the boy safe all this time, and now the new king is asking. Yes, it was customary for new kings to eliminate all the heirs. That was considered acceptable practice. So when David says, is there anybody left? Ziba, who's called in by the new king, has a choice to make. What should he do? Do I give up this child that I've been trying to protect all this time? Am I loyal to the king, the new king, or loyal to the old king? What should I do? Notice Ziba's response, how he downplays the threat. Now remember, this is Saul's servant, Saul's steward. He knows a thing or two about paranoid kings who feel threatened. And so he tells David, well, yeah, but he's lame in both legs, and he's living in Lo-debar, a desolate place. Literally, the name means land of nothing. Ziba says, well, yes, there's this one disabled kid of Jonathan's, but he's a nobody from nowhere. Not really a threat. To which David says, bring him to me. Ooh. Can you hear the ooh? Bring him to me. Now, if Ziba was thinking there might be a threat, imagine what Mephibosheth is thinking, right? His entire life, and we don't know exactly how old he is, but he's a young man by this time. His entire life he's been in hiding, knowing that his life was in danger. First from the Philistines that had already killed his father, his grandfather, and 2 uncles. And now from the new king. And he surely, though he may not know much else, he surely knew about the time when Saul persecuted and wanted to kill David, right? Surely he knew that part of the family history. But he's called before the current king, David. Ziba does what his new king asks him to do and brings Mephibosheth to him. So when Mephibosheth shows up, it is with hat in hand and bending down low, hoping, probably in his mind hoping against hope, that he might somehow be spared. Mephibosheth, says David, calling his name for the first time that anybody mentions his name in this story. I thought that was interesting. Mephibosheth, he says. Yes. Mephibosheth says, head still bowed. Then David says, you have nothing to fear from me. Can you feel the relief? At least he's not going to kill me right now, right? You have nothing to fear. In fact, I'd like to do something special for you. In memory of in memory and honor of your father Jonathan, I'm returning all of the properties of your grandfather Saul. And furthermore, from now on, you'll eat at my table. His inheritance is restored. He is to live at the palace and to eat with the king. Mephibosheth, see, I told you it was a hard word to say. Mephibosheth says, what? He cannot believe his ears. In fact, he's still in shock. I'm just a dead dog, he says. Why would you do this for me? He already felt like he was a nothing. He already felt like he should already be dead. I'm just a dead dog to you. Why me? David picks up and says, let me go just a step further. Not only am I returning your inheritance, not only am I inviting you to live at the palace, not only am I inviting you to eat with me at my table as part of my family, but Ziba, I'm making you the steward of everything that Saul had. All of Mephibosheth's inheritance. You are to steward. You are to till the land. You are to raise all that he needs and care for him for the rest of his life. Not only you, but your household and all of your servants will serve as personal stewards to Mephibosheth. This is a true rags to riches, a nobody from nowhere becomes a part of the royal family. Not for any effort on his part, but by the grace of King David. A foreshadowing of God's covenant with Israel. David is honoring the covenant that he made with Jonathan when they were kids, and invites Mephibosheth into the family. I was asked just this morning, what are we supposed to be learning from all these stories of unknown stories from the Bible? Let me name just a couple of things. First of all, we learned something about family and commitment. That family's not always the immediate people who are born into the family, but sometimes people that you choose to be a part of the family. Mephibosheth was made part of David's family because he honored a commitment that he had made. So we learned something about promises made and kept, don't we? All that time, there was nothing that would require David to honor the covenant that he had made with Jonathan. As far as we know, it was never anything more than a private pact between the two of them that nobody else had any knowledge of. Mephibosheth certainly didn't know it or expect it, but David kept his promise. We learned something about taking care of people with disability, honoring them, seeing them as a treasure. David saw in Mephibosheth somebody who could be honored, somebody who could be treasured, somebody who could be valued, even though he was disabled for the rest of his life. David saw the treasure within him. And like I said a moment ago, there's a bit of foreshadowing here about God's covenant with Israel. Fast forward to the New Testament with me for just a moment. Jesus tells a story about how in the kingdom we're to treat everyone. He said the kingdom is kind of like a person who gave a banquet and invited people to come. Some people started giving excuses and not coming to the banquet. And the host said, well, then go out into the streets and the lanes, the highways and the byways, into the town, into the countryside. Bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame, specifically naming people with disabilities, right? Go out into the roads and the lanes and compel people to come in so that my house might be full. At God's banquet, everyone is welcome and honored and valued. So I end with the same question I've been asking. What is the treasure inside of you? You, just like Mephibosheth, are a person of great value, just like you are. You don't have to do anything to honor that value or to earn that value. You have that treasure within you. What is your treasure? This is your turn. We say every Sunday morning that we proclaim the good news of God together. This is the together part. I've done my part. Now it's your turn. Questions, comments, observations are welcome at this point. Who has an yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that David sought out the relatives of Saul. I think his lingering pain over the loss of Jonathan never left him.
Right.
And I think in some ways, once he learned of Mephibosheth, he saw him as his own son.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I think as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that observation. I think that played a huge role. His relationship with Jonathan, whatever it was, compelled him to take care of Mephibosheth. Yeah, Becky.
Well, I think that our treasures that are hidden within us, sometimes they're different. Like when you're young, you'll have a different. And when you get old, it's totally different. But they are there. God uses you where he needs you. That's what I feel like anyway. And Mephibosheth, when David called him that one time, he probably had to say the word 20 times before he said Mephibosheth.
He probably did. I practiced all weekend long and still stumbled over it. Someone else.
Sydney has her hand raised. Bob.
Who does?
Sydney.
Oh, Sydney. Hey, Sydney.
Hey, I guess because I've thought about that since I realized that was the question last week, is what are our treasures? And it is so hard to find your treasure when you've been mistreated, and it's hard to find your treasures in the world we live in today, with the number of so many judgmental people out there.
Yes.
So that's a hard question to answer.
It is. And I think today's lesson was particularly helpful because Mephibosheth did not see any value in himself at all. I'm just a dead dog, he says, when he comes before David. He did not see that he was worth anything to anyone. He could not see it for himself, but David did.
Do you think Mephibosheth, however you say it, gained...
Yeah, be careful saying that word. You might say a bad word.
I know. It's very dangerous. Did he gain self-worth because of how the king treated him?
I think so. Don't you? It makes sense to me that if you're sitting in the palace, you're being served by others, you're eating at the king's table, whatever the king is eating, certainly going to build your self-esteem, don't you think?
I don't know. That seems so superficial to me when your hidden treasures are so deep, you know.
It may have been a hard time. It may have taken him a long time for it to come out, but I think little by little over time, it seems to me that it would.
When he realized he wasn't going to get killed.
Right, yeah. That would help too.
And I think Mephibosheth learned my daddy meant a lot to King David.
Yes.
And therefore I mean a lot to King David.
Exactly. Okay, we've got one that's been trying to talk for several minutes now. Every time I hold the microphone in front of me, somebody else speaks. Hang on a second.
I think when King David discovered him, I think he wanted to place Mephibosheth from nobody from nowhere to somebody from somewhere.
I love that. Thank you. Great comment.
It's a good point.
Yes. Yeah. Great comment. Yeah. He's going to be preaching for me next week. So, all right. Who else has a comment or an observation, question? Just 1 second. We have people online that are watching us, so I want to make sure that they can hear your question or comment.
I'm extremely late. I know that, and I apologize. What's this? Just a quick synopsis. I mean, I'm already hearing the comments. Wonderful comments made. Great points. But can I just get like the small out of or synopsis of what the sermon was about today, and then I'll put the whole pieces together.
Okay. Thank you. You were late to the party, weren't you? Okay, so this is the story of Jonathan, David's friend, possibly lover, from Saul's court, Saul's son. So it'd be Mephibosheth was Saul's grandson, Jonathan's son, and was disabled in an accident shortly after his father, grandfather, and both uncles were killed in battle at the same time that David would have risen to become king. And sometime after that, David starts inquiring about any relatives of Saul's that might still be around, which most people would have seen as a real threat to those heirs. And so Mephibosheth comes to David, certainly expecting to be killed, but David shows favor and kindness and grace, returns his inheritance, and puts Ziba in charge of caring for him for the rest of his life. So that's kind of a short synopsis. Thank you. Well, you didn't know the rest of the story, did you? So I'm glad you asked. Anybody else? Other questions, comments? Thank you for being with us today, for worshiping with us. We'll look at another hidden treasure from the Scriptures next week. Invite you back as we continue in our series, Hidden Treasures of the Bible. Continue to think about the treasure that is in you, because you too have a treasure. Amen.